Good afternoon, everybody. This is Ken Knight with the Paragon Counselor, and I have with me Dr. Melissa Walker Fleming. And I'm going to turn it right over to you, Melissa, to kind of explain a little bit about what you do and what you are best in the world at.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dr. Knight, for having me. I'm Dr. Fleming, and I'm the owner and counselor and supervisor at MWF Counseling, and that's in Prairieville. And mostly it's just a private practice that's really set up to treat adolescents and adults. We see some couples and some families, and using a very CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy approach. So I graduated from UNO with my master's and my PhD in 2020, and I've been in private practice settings for a little over 10 years now.
Okay. A lot of experience there. What did you study with your doctorate?
In counselor education. So
what topic?
For my dissertation?
Correct, yes.
Yes, so my research interest was about the emotional intelligence and personality type of counselor education master students.
Okay. So you are the communications expert for communications experts.
I mean, apparently I am today, yeah.
Okay, awesome. What makes someone great at communication?
I think what makes someone great with communication is whenever they are operating in an assertive communication role. So let me give you some context to kind of explain that. So whenever I'm working with clients, I like to talk about the three main communication types. That would be passive, assertive, and aggressive. So with passive communication, it's I am respecting what you think and feel, but I'm not necessarily respecting what I think and feel. An example of that would be someone cuts you in front of a line and you don't necessarily say anything. Super irritated, but you just sit there. You mostly just take it. And then with aggressive is on the opposite end. So I am respecting what I think and feel, but I am not respecting what you think and feel. So say you're back in that line, someone cuts you off, you chew them out, curse them out, get yourself kicked out of the movie theater or whatever it may be. Okay. This is obviously a pre-COVID example. Sure. Yeah. And so with assertive communication, it's I'm respecting what I think and feel, but I'm also respecting what you think and feel. And to me, this is what kind of makes someone a great communicator because they're, aware of what it is that they're feeling and thinking and what they're wanting to communicate, but they're also being respectful of whoever their audience is or the person that they're communicating with. Because you can say your piece, but if the other person's not listening, it's not actually going down the way that you think it is.
How does one assess the other person's point of view or needs or viewpoint to know what those are better?
Well, I mean, to me, this is where that emotional intelligence piece comes in. So with emotional intelligence, if we're using the ability model, we're looking at emotional perception, emotional integration of thought, emotional understanding, and emotional management. And what that basically means is, are you perceiving someone's emotions? Are you even thinking along the lines, hey, does this person seem stressed out or distracted or maybe busy? Because, for some people, they're on their phone because they're running late to pick up the kids from daycare. They're not actually listening to what you're saying, and it has nothing to do with what you're saying. It's that they're caught up in their own, version of busy and whatever their chore list is for the day. Are they, understanding that emotion accurately? I mean, for some people who struggle with, that kind of negative forecast thinking, they may think like, oh, I bet that person doesn't like me because they have a scowl on their face or they seem really irritated. When again, they're not necessarily putting it into context. Maybe it's because they just had a fight with their husband and they're, again, lost in their own world and not necessarily even aware that, you're standing there or that you attempted to say hello to them.
So I can almost speculate that if somebody is making the error of being too passive or too aggressive, that it might stem partially from a perception error that might be either guiding or just not even entering their framework at all. So if someone's maybe a passive communicator, they might be overly perceiving rather than accurately perceiving the need and sort of hanging themselves up on it. But if someone's aggressive, maybe they're not even trying to look for paralinguistic cues at all.
Yes, I mean, I think that that definitely plays a role, but with passive communicators, I mean, this may be learned behavior, family of origin stuff, or maybe just a difficulty with kind of exuding that confidence. Maybe they're more introverted. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why somebody may tend to, kind of shy away from confrontation, or again, not even necessarily confrontation, but just advocating for themselves, or, speaking their mind whenever they're actually thinking of something. I mean, for some people, this is a lifelong struggle.
Sure.
They're not necessarily revealing what they're actually thinking or feeling to anyone. And, again, for some people, it's they don't necessarily take the time to reflect to decide what it is I'm actually thinking or feeling about this topic. Because if you're constantly dodging things or trying to keep things surface or not letting yourself go in there because your response to, say, stress is to shut down, then again, you're not going to have a great way to communicate whatever your point of view is, because you haven't actually assessed your own point of view initially.
Yeah. One disadvantage I can imagine in our culture is that if you look at traditional places, there are kind of pre-established norms for the right way to talk to people and who you address in this part of society or within this position from which context. And we're in a very individualistic, merged, very little tradition, everything being shaken up every 5 years, more fashion than entrenched norms. So I can imagine that somebody who doesn't feel that confident to begin with might be completely lost in the proper context of how they even should approach a particular scene.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are definitely multicultural factors to kind of that play into that, because I mean, if you're in this collectivistic system, which meaning that, family first, we're a unit, we're not necessarily separated as individuals, then, you may not be the person who's allowed to speak up on behalf of your family. You may be looking to an elder or someone else that you've entrusted as kind of a more reliable advocate. So for some people, it's a power differential. I've been trained to not speak. I'm supposed to be subservient, or I lack that confidence that I have something worth sharing. So there's a lot of things that can kind of play into that passive communication.
And then I'm also thinking, with age differences exacerbated by the pandemic, how many people do more conversation with their thumbs than their words these days? And then
Absolutely. And I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I mean, what I find whenever I'm on social media, reading the comments section sometimes is just now entertainment, because it's not so much passive communication that you're seeing, but very aggressive. It is shocking. You'll read a headline about like maybe, a child or something that's relatively, benign or innocent, and then just seeing kind of the rage and that real anger, that comes out, and where people start kind of arguing with each other or picking it apart or trying to make something political. It can be kind of shocking, but for some people, this is a great way for them to be able to express that frustration or that angst. Because I mean, let's be honest, the 2020s have not been easy times. It can be kind of almost a unhealthy coping skill to unleash that kind of, hate, those angry feelings. One of my go-tos whenever I feel like I'm working with clients, almost regardless of whatever issue that they have going on, I always coming back to, if you don't express your stuff, it shows up in weird ways. And I feel like reading the social media comments, regardless of what the topic is a great example of that.
Yeah, my favorite comment is, oh, look, I'm in the trailer park of the internet.
Yeah, well, I mean, because again, for some people, it's kind of like a sparring. I know that we had talked earlier, and you mentioned Jules, that you're a fan, and I mean, in a way, it's kind of a verbal duel.
No, it's not a duel if you can't die.
Well,
so they'd be a lot more polite if they had to actually bleed for it.
Well, and I think that that's part of that aggressive communication, where people feel maybe more emboldened online, because they're not necessarily facing someone, because you can't read someone's emotions or perceive accurately if they're having a bad day or what their situation's like. There's no context to those comments. So people feel a little bit more likely to kind of unleash or very boldly state something. Whereas if we were in person having this conversation, I wonder if those conversations would go down a little differently.
I couldn't see how they wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, and empathy is a thing. I feel like that sometimes going back to that communication piece, I mean, incorporating empathy is part of that assertive communication, because if you're trying to respect, what someone else is thinking and feeling, you're incorporating that into your ability to share whatever it is, your point of view.
Sure.
And that's difficult to assume whenever it's not a real person, or you have declared yourself the expert of the topic, and that anyone else that disagrees with you is somehow irrelevant.
Or if you can't separate your identity from your ideas and someone challenges those ideas, and it could be seen as like they're attacking me, right?
Absolutely. Well, and that I think is definitely something that's happening, because whenever you're dealing with person to person communication, you can say, oh, well, they have parents, or they have a child, or they have a really cute dog, or I know they just got laid off, or, all of these other things. When you're attacking an organization or a belief or an ideal, especially in politics, you're up against an army. You're now involved, and you are, advocating for your value system. And I think a lot of people have given themselves that freedom to really unleash. And I mean, in the process, not properly communicate their point of view at all. Because I mean, the thing is whenever you're yelling at someone or speaking really aggressively, the other person is usually very likely to have shut down, and they're no longer hearing your words. They're just hearing this person who's kind of getting at them.
Sure,
So their guard is up. They're trying to defend themselves, or be prepared for what the next blow will be. The message is usually completely lost, which is why, I really like to stay in that assertive zone, if you will. I find that that's just a more efficient way to land whatever you're actually trying to communicate.
And a metaphor that comes to mind for me is how, like, be it arguments or anything else, it's way less intensive in effort to destroy something than to build it, right? So
Yes.
if you want to have a good dialogue and respectful understanding of someone's point of view back and forth, that takes some work and some suppression of your own drives, but you can just run your mouth for 3 words and ruin it all.
Well, when you're rebuilding something, it's logically driven, whereas when you're tearing down something, that's an emotional decision. And I mean, it might feel really good to just choose someone out, or to have that catharsis where you kind of get all of that negativity out in the moment. But there's some real damage that's done. It's more difficult to actually humble yourself and say, okay, here was my part in this, and I'm actually inviting you to share whatever your point of view is. And even if I disagree, I'm actually, humbling myself long enough to where I'm hearing what you're saying. That's another thing that I really encourage my clients whenever they're struggling with their communication, like, for example, in a relationship or a friendship, or with a family member, is that active listening. Can you repeat what that person just said? Because so many times people hear something that wasn't actually just stated. Oh, I needed to work out today. Oh, I heard that you just called me fat.
Sure.
That's not, no, working out is not a direct, representation of being fat. But the fact is, if that's what someone's hearing, then all of a sudden they're, in defense mode and angry or hurt. They're no longer participating in that conversation logically. They're more in a more emotive state.
And that's, if someone thinks they got called fat, I'm sure that's how things get burned down.
I mean, I feel like it's the go-to, I can call me fat, you can't call me fat,
Sure.
regardless of who that person is. Yeah.
Am I being a bad trainer then?
I don't know. Are you?
I definitely call my clients fat sometimes, in fitness, not in counseling, of course. But yeah, that may not make it right though.
Well, you tell me, would that fall into the passive aggressive or assertive communication style?
Well, I'm definitely thinking about their needs to not be fat anymore.
Mm-hmm. But are you assessing to see if they're available to hear that?
Probably not.
Some people, maybe, that's motivating, kind of like that kick in the pants to say, okay, like, this is where we're at. I'm now getting called that word, so I need to do something about it. But for some, I mean, it's a great way for them to shut down and, decide that you're mean, they're not coming back, and that they're never going to work out again. Because sometimes, is a nice way.
They may be fat now, but in 4 to 6 months, at 3 times a week, maybe they won't be.
No, I agree.
And then it kind of, I didn't think about it at this point at first, but then we kind of drift, and when you start to get from personal communications to things like sales or trying to get people on board with your ideas or to cooperate with you. And you think about how much of that is done in a very fear-mongering kind of way that tends to sometimes work, though.
Well, and I think that that's whenever you have to really be aware of what is my goal here. If I'm trying to, sell someone a car and it's really just about my numbers, about keeping my job, getting my promotion, I'm not necessarily all that worried about what their situation is. I mean, so you may be finding yourself kind of coming across a little bit more strongly, or really hammering down the positives of them buying this car or how that might benefit them, but in reality there's kind of an ulterior agenda. Whereas I think the people who are successful salesmen have to read the room to some extent, and rely on that emotional intelligence, because for some people, I mean, they're not buying that car, they're just wasting your time. But for people that are maybe on the fence, that's something that you can kind of use where it's saying, well, you tell me, why are you here at this dealership, or what would be helpful if you owned a car? Tell me a little bit more about your life, and including those personal details, I think is a way to kind of make someone, again, feel more comfortable and more open to actually hearing what you're saying. Because if you're just coming across, more kind of clingy, or, going a little more aggressive than need be, they're shutting down, they're retreating from you. You're annoying. They need, they'd rather just kind of maybe go somewhere.
And then in the cases where you imagine it does sometimes work, and I agree entirely that if you want to build a long-term empire of any form, you can't just be plundering people's needs with your own aggressive sales tactics. But I wonder what type of communication or, allows people to succumb to that aggressive, pushy approach, right? Like,
well, I mean, again, I feel like pushy and aggressive approach almost has to be more clearly defined. Because I mean, are they selling something that's compelling, or something that, or are they landing it in a way that it's being received, or are they kind of scaring that person away, and not necessarily succeeding in that? Or are they giving up in the process and, going from aggressive to passive to, kind of, okay, I'm just going to leave you alone? Because I do think that there's something to be said for that consistency in your communication and trying to kind of think long term. Like, what's my goal here? What am I trying to communicate? But here's the thing with that assertive communication, at some point you do have to respect what the other person is thinking and feeling. They may or may not be buying what you're selling. And in a way, it's, I think wise to actually acknowledge that, because they may not be buying your car, but maybe the next person that you're ignoring because you're so busy focusing on this conversation may actually be, a willing participant in that.
Yeah. And then, I'm also thinking about like obvious and then unforeseen consequences, right? So you can get this messaging that, sales is a great domain of this, because it's the classic sales culture is like annoy a million people an hour on a cold call and just keep going and keep going. And,
statistically, I mean, it's going to work if you reach enough people, there's probably going to be a pool of people that are willing, participants in that. I would guess that's kind of that.
Yeah. And I guess you see when there's success, and it tends to be like, I guess, a survivorship bias, where you'll see the instances where that person sold a bunch of cars or got a bunch of people to sign up for something, but you don't get to see all the undercurrent of the inefficiency and the hurt feelings and the damage to that person's reputation by communicating in that aggressive way, I guess.
Well, and again, I mean, if you're in that aggressive zone, you're really more concerned about your message and what you're thinking, you're feeling, and how it went down for you and how you're feeling afterwards. And you're missing the part where there's another person involved that absolutely has their own thoughts and feelings about that. And again, that's whenever you have to look at what that goal is. If my goal is to communicate effectively so that person has the highest odds of actually hearing me out for where I'm coming from, aggressive is not tending to that. It's tending to yourself, but you're missing your goal. It's not, something that's you're going to be successful at if you're not actually respecting that other person.
Do you get the feeling that society is not really doing a great job of conveying that message about communication in general?
Well, society is, a big, I think, concept, but the reality is communication is a lot of work. And I think that it's definitely, I mean, I don't recall having that overly focused on in school. I mean, written communication, I think, was taught and, drilled into our heads. But that verbal communication, I mean, it was either speech, which, number one fear, public speaking, or, don't talk in school. So I think that there's a lot of assumptions, which is another, tricky area when it comes to communications, that for some reason people are just going to magically figure this out when, we're blessed to be in a field where communication comes up all of the time. So we're probably a little savvier than I think most. But I mean, one of the joys that I found is helping people, get in touch with that communication, because sometimes even just learning some basic concepts really goes a long way in their relationships or in their work life, because in their mind, they're assuming it's obvious what they're thinking or feeling. And they're very frustrated or, distraught why other people aren't just getting it. When in reality, people aren't great mind readers,
So I feel like there's a good question I could ask here, because I see you or hear you talking about maybe some practical application stuff. So let's say somebody's not savvy, they're not skilled, their experience of communication is being told to just talk or shut up, and they're generally thinking more about what they want. And whenever they're not, it tends to be accidental, instinctive, unsystematized. So how would you take somebody who has no formal communication savvy, and what could you give them in a single technique or tactic that would level them up?
Well, again, I think just going to those three basic, passive, assertive, aggressive, and trying for them to take some time to say, okay, which modality am I working from? What zone am I trying to come from? And what did I just do there? Because the beauty of communication is, say you have one conversation that goes terribly, it's not what you intended, it goes real left. You can always revisit that, should that other person be willing to hear you out. You can write, an email or a text, try to set up another time to kind of as a do-over, but to keep that foremost in your mind. I also think that, using a trick, the positive, negative, positive, kind of, it's like, I think it's called like a positive sandwich or something equally ridiculous. But the concept is that you're kind of trying to acknowledge how someone's feeling, so validate, like, thank you for taking your time to hear me out. I really appreciate it. I know you've got a lot going on. Because again, someone's feeling relaxed, they're feeling appreciated, they're feeling, maybe optimistic of whatever it is you're going to say, and then hitting them with whatever the, point is that you're trying to communicate that they may or may not agree with. For example, like, I'm not sure if you realize this, but, last month, I felt like, there was some miscommunication happening at work, and it's really starting to, affect my performance. And I was hoping to, straighten it out with you. So that hitting them with that negative, and then kind of moving towards that positive, and and I know that this may be awkward to talk about, but I really do think it's going to be something that benefits our relationship and ultimately ups my efficiency at this company.
Okay. So I'm hearing, I just cut you off. Go ahead.
It's just saying positive, negative, positive.
And I think I'm, correct me if I'm off, but I think I heard you go a little deeper than that too, where, the compliment sandwich or positive sandwich.
Yeah.
When you think about it in typical like HR trainings, it's say something nice and I'll make your point and I'll say something nice. But you went a little deeper where you kind of made the say something nice tie into your perception of their need, right? Like, my efficiency at this job will improve for you if.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because again, if you're trying to kind of keep in line with what is going to benefit you, but also respecting whatever is going to benefit that other person, I think that, at the root of who people are, people like to be taken care of and like to be covered. They aren't necessarily running a charity. And so if you can appeal to someone for something that's going to be mutually beneficial, then I think that you're going to have higher odds of success of them, because part of it's communication, but also part of it's trying to, maybe discuss a change or, some systematic tweaking that would improve the situation overall. But I think that the communication is definitely the foundation of that before you can kind of agree to an altered game plan.
So, I'm trying to pick apart the details of it. So, you're definitely saying that you're not going to get very far if you don't actually have an understanding of what the other person cares about, of course. And very few people.
I think a lot of people shut down when they get stressed out or when they get angry or whenever they get their feelings hurt. So you're losing a captive audience. They're now going into their own head and thinking about how messed up it is what you just said, or what did you mean by that, or like, they're now swimming with their own emotions. And so again, trying to keep it in that assertive zone is maybe acknowledging, like, I know this may not be fun to hear, or this may be a difficult conversation to have, but you're trying to keep them at a seat at the table, instead of, someone who's physically present, but in reality, they shut down this conversation 5 minutes ago. You are wasting your breath. And
Well,
probably
I like the way you put that.
they're going to vent to their friends about.
Yeah, it was, you said a seat at the table, right? So it's one of the, it's almost like the game theory understanding that if you're going to play long-term games with the same partners, then you can't burn them, right? Like you can't treat them like a random person on the internet whose ideas you disagree with, and you act like a destructive troll, right?
I mean, I'll tell you this much: if I were to get trolled on the internet, that's not who I'd be wanting to hang out with on the weekend.
Depends on the humor level, though, right?
I mean, that may be for you, but I personally, aggressive communication's not my fave.
Fair enough. But with the seat at the table, if you're thinking to yourself, like, if I want to keep these people around, or I want to keep including them, then I have to say the hard thing, but I really have to think, what can I offer them that keeps them wanting to be at my table after I say what I'm going to say? Yeah. Because
that's whenever you're starting to incorporate, this cohesive relationship. And I mean, I find that most conversations, if there, is really some meat to what needs to be said, it's because you're trying to preserve that relationship. You're trying to protect yourself from future hurt or, negative feelings, but you're also trying to keep it together, because otherwise it would just be a final conversation. You're done. I'm out of here. I've decided that you're no longer a safe person for me to associate with. And the reality is, if you're coworkers, that's probably not going to go over great. Or if you're family together, or if it's a long-term friendship. I think that's whenever you have to start saying, okay, what is my goal here? How invested am I in this relationship? And, is there something we can salvage? Because that's whenever you kind of get into those values and those meanings, which I think is ultimately, underlying, that ability to communicate. Because you have to ask yourself, okay, why do I even want to have this conversation? And it's like, well, it's because I want to feel better about the situation, or I want to be able to get over something or move past whatever has happened in the past. So there's a lot of different motives to be considered.
So if the person's worth keeping at the table, so to speak, be assertive. But otherwise, you control them, right? Just be aggressive.
Your lunch at work, or your lunch hour at work is worth preserving. Because for some people, they wouldn't necessarily, care to continue that relationship on an individual basis. But within the context of a group, it's really helpful if we can keep things civil, get along enough.
I can't go straight to aggressive with everybody I dislike and don't want at my table.
No, that's a great way to never have any group text.
Darn. Okay.
That lasts. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'll have to go back and revise 2 behaviors now. I can't call people fat, and I can't troll them all the time.
Yeah. Well, you can. That's the beauty of the world we live in. You can. You just may not get the results that you're hoping to achieve.
Gosh, and here, I've been misinformed this whole time. So I'm moving to a little bit of silliness as we approach the end of the interview, right?
Yes.
I've seen, what I think I've gathered from this conversation is that, we kind of already know what we want. If you really want to be better at getting it in a comfortable, recurring context that you enjoy, then try to navigate from a lens that fits the other person's needs and viewpoints as well before you shoot off at the mouth or take an action. And it seems like it's going to enhance your chances of getting your.
Well, and I think always trying to keep that finger on the pulse of what's logical. Like, what do I actually think would be effective versus, okay, I'm now getting into too emotional of a territory where I'm no longer carefully choosing what I'm saying. It's just coming out as it comes out. I think, and trying to say, okay, I'm starting to get into that aggressive zone because my emotions are now like in the driver's seat. So maybe I need to take a breather. Like, I'm actually no longer equipped to effectively have this conversation. Because, sometimes taking a breath or, trying again whenever you're in a more logical space can really go a long way.
Yeah. And doing that can look out for the other person too. If you just admit that you're not there right now, and you prevent some damage, it sounds like. Well,
and I think that's a really important part is speaking to how you're actually feeling. Because again, if you're owning it as I am, been hurt by this situation, or I, I'm feeling a little off because of whatever we're talking about, I think is a great way to kind of up the odds that the other person's hearing that in an empathetic ear versus saying you are the problem, or I don't like your behavior, so that's where those I statements versus those you statements are really helpful. But the reality is we could talk about this for years because
Sure.
really
Yeah,
is a
but I mean, even in this discussion, I just cut you off of reception on accident, but there's a few things that you could take from that if you know nothing about communication, and you could thread them and probably get somewhere. So I do think that your time will hopefully be well spent there. And one more silly question for you.
Okay.
You are dubbed Queen of the Universe by my authority, because that totally matters.
Hooray.
What would you change?
I personally think that inferior socks are a terrible waste of fabric, and that fuzzy socks, those really cozy, soft, overly thick, plush, usually in a very obnoxious colors, are the way to go. So Queen of the World, I would highly recommend that we just stick to fuzzy socks and cut out these boring white pieces of fabric that just are itchy and a total waste of time, in my opinion.
Look, if people can get away with UGG boots, socks that aren't even visible, that ought to be a no-brainer.
I mean, this is where I think if leaning into your confidence goes a long way, because, if you're wearing fuzzy socks, you're good people by me.
Especially with sandals on after, right?
I mean, do what you gotta do.
Fair enough. Well, Dr. Fleming, how could people connect with you if they wanted to learn more about what you do?
I think sending an email to mwfcounseling@gmail.com is a great way to, connect for possibly scheduling appointments. And I also have a Facebook page for my business, which is MWF Counseling.
Awesome. Dr. Fleming, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I was going to go do some trolling on YouTube, but I think you convinced me to stop.
Hooray. Another good deed done.
Awesome.
All right. Well, have a great day, and thanks for having me.
You too.